impactful learning support. So today I'm going to be talking you through a little bit of background behind neurodiversity, cognition. I'll also be sharing 2 results of recent scientific research that we've published, all to do with the impact of support. And finally, I'll be talking you through our quality assurance framework for learning support that has been developed with a working group in the sector, before handing over to our wonderful guest, Connor Daniel, who is a Cognassist learner, and he's a level 3 outdoor activity instructor apprentice with Skern. Welcome, Connor.
Hello.
And before we kick off, I'd like to pass over to Jack for a brief introduction.
Oh, thank you, Louise. Yeah, just a really quick introduction from myself and from an NCFE sector perspective. I hope today, and everybody that's on this call today, I think the main message around this is around collaboration in the sector. Ultimately, everybody that works in the sector, we are all out for the absolute same outcome, which ultimately is improving the lives of every student, customer that we work with. But one of the frustrations is absolutely about how different organisations which are designed to support your institutions in that journey, unable to collaborate and ultimately create the best outcomes possible, whether that be because data doesn't speak to each other, reports sit separately, or there's no level of collaboration. So from an NCFE and Cognassist perspective, this is really about highlighting to the sector what wonderful things can be done when we genuinely start to collaborate. There will be absolutely space in terms of any questions that anybody's got. Please put them in the chat, and maybe after this meeting we'll be more than happy to come back and try our best to answer them. But I think the foundation point of this is, when we collaborate, what can we do to ultimately affect and impact the outcomes for the learners that we work with? So I'm more than happy to take anybody's feedback at the end around that. But I hope everybody enjoys today's session. So thank you, and back over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Jack. Completely agree. Collaboration is key. It's strength in numbers, isn't it? And we have to work together when we are working with massive topics like providing equity and breaking down barriers to learning, because every learner deserves the best possible chance of success. Just a little bit of an intro before I get started. So I'm Louise, Director of Education at Cognassist. For those of you who don't know us, we are the UK's leading cognitive assessment and support platform, and we work with over 150 of the UK's best education providers, including independent training providers, colleges and university. And Cognassist's mission really is to help every single learner reach their full potential, but also empower learning providers to support their learners confidently. We built Cognassist because we wanted to provide a scalable and accessible method of assessment, enabling providers to support learners proactively rather than reactively. Before we start, I would like to kick off with a short exercise. So I'm going to give you a brain break. I want you to take a few seconds just to write down on a bit of paper, on your phone or on your tablet, any thoughts that are going through your head. You might be thinking about tasks that you need to do, put on your to-do list. You might be thinking about what you need to buy for your tea tonight. All of these thoughts can really distract your attention in the moment and make it much harder to focus. So take a little time now to transfer that information physically out of your minds. Okay, so that is called the brain dump method. And this is the first step about just getting out anything that comes to mind without filtering yourself. So you can then sort through these things and prioritize them at a later date. If you adopt this method, you can find that you organize your thoughts better. You can reduce the feeling of overwhelm. You can be more productive and less forgetful. Holding lots of information in our heads requires us to use our working memory. And this can easily cause cognitive strain and cognitive overload. And it's simple techniques like this brain dump method that can really help in our day-to-day lives. So now you should be able to fully immerse yourself in the session and hopefully get more out of it. Technology has changed the way we learn, but also the way we think about learning itself. We now have access to information and capabilities that even just 10 years ago, we could only dream of. All of us here and billions of people around the world now have access to the internet. This innovation alone has democratized access to information, but it also is helping us break down barriers to education. We can now access knowledge or tutorials to address immediate problems or learn new skills from scratch. This sharing of knowledge is so powerful. And at the same time, our human understanding has also exploded. We now know more about the brain and cognitive science and what drives us as humans more than ever before. Cognitive science is a fairly new science. It's only a couple of hundred years old. It's obviously evolved from philosophy and psychology, but now we're at the point of accurately being able to map the functions of the brain and how we process information in multiple ways. So this mix of new technology and human understanding is shaping the world around us every single day. And it's giving us opportunities and possibilities to drive change. From working with post-16 education providers, we know that approximately 2 to 5% of learners are self-declaring with learning needs, which is very low. With our identification, we're finding that at levels 1 to 5, roughly 1 in 3 learners has a cognitive learning need that could pose a barrier to their learning. At higher levels, it's 1 in 5. Of course, this is lower, but this is still significant. And this is a big discrepancy and really illuminates that there are a lot of learners out there with hidden cognitive learning needs. We're already beginning to understand that neurodiversity is much more common than previously thought. And this is going to affect learners at every single level of education and, of course, employment. Part of the stigma around learning difficulties is that it's to do with intelligence. It absolutely isn't. We all have our own strengths and challenges in different environments and settings. And there is still significant identification at higher levels of employment as well. Offering quality support isn't about simplifying information. It's about finding different ways to approach and adapt the learning environment at every level of education to enable appropriate development from an accurate starting point. There are hugely successful people that have learning difficulties, and how we talk to learners will shape their own expectations of themselves. But what is neurodiversity? It's simply a term that describes the natural variation in human cognition and the way each of us experiences the world differently. At Cognassist, we say that the brain is actually more unique than the fingerprint. And our unique perspective on the world is influenced by loads of things: our culture, genetics, the environment we're surrounded in, the people around us, but fundamentally by the multiple functions and processes of our mind. And measuring these processes can help us to understand our strengths and also areas where we may need support, particularly when it comes to learning. Cognassist works by assessing the 8 key domains of the brain related to thinking and learning processes. We use standard scoring, age-based norming, and a recognised threshold of 1 standard deviation below the mean to identify learners who may experience significant learning difficulties in certain aspects of learning. These tools are used throughout the scientific world, and especially with cognitive assessment, whether that's paper or digital. Now, this isn't brain training, which is a bit of a myth. The brain training games like Nintendo built don't improve your overall abilities. You're just learning to get better at that particular task. Unfortunately, it's not transferable to the real world. Instead, it's about understanding your cognitive profile, relying on your strengths and using coping strategies that allow you to perform to the best of your abilities. People who experience difficulties with learning are not incapable of achieving their qualifications and can often overcome these difficulties with the right flexibilities in place, as we're going to hear from Connor. But without support, learning can be a really draining, overwhelming and tiring process, and we might have to work twice as hard to achieve the same. Now, this isn't sustainable or equitable. Think of neurodiversity like biodiversity. The variation is a good, strong thing, and ecosystems with greater biodiversity are more successful and flourishing. If you want to destroy an ecosystem, reducing biodiversity is the most lethal way to do it. And equally, if you want to boost economic growth and ensure a society where more people can flourish, then understanding and supporting neurodiversity is absolutely the best way to do it. We can help learners to approach learning in a new way that works for them. We can also help educators provide information in the optimum way for that person and help ensure that everybody has the very best chance of success. So cognition, or cognitive diversity, makes up an important aspect of neurodiversity, centred around the processes that we use to learn and apply our knowledge. This is all about thinking, knowing, remembering, judging, and problem solving. Understanding the differences that your learners may experience and some of the difficulties that can arise if they're not properly supported is a key part of your responsibility as educators. And it also helps to break down what learners might be struggling with. Two learners with the same diagnosis might have very different needs. And so breaking this down for your learners, even if they already have a diagnosis, could be really helpful for both parties. These are the 8 cognitive domains that we measure. If you've heard of the WAIS and the WIMS, they focus on very similar domains around language, memory, speed of processing and reasoning. And I'm going to be upfront with you here. There are about 80 cognitive domains in total, but no cognitive assessment in the world measures every single part of someone's cognition. This number comes from the Cattell-Horn-Carroll theory of cognitive abilities, which is the most comprehensive model of human cognition in the world. These 8 domains are some of the most commonly measured and highly researched domains. And in education, there are also some of these cognitive differences that are going to have the most impact on learning. And then they help us to break down what difficulties learners may be experiencing. And whether you use cognitive assessment or not, it's important to understand the differences that your learners may experience and ways to support these learning needs. It's helpful also if you think about your own behaviours, how you interact with others, and the natural differences you may also be experiencing. Even if we don't experience ongoing difficulties in our working lives, we can still relate to this and work with learners to adapt the environment to better suit their needs. So, we wanted to take the opportunity to share the findings of recently published research that the science team at Cognassist conducted. The first of the 2 studies was a longitudinal study. So we were measuring change over time. We investigated confidence and motivation towards completing daily tasks that link towards learning. We did this through a rigorously designed self-report scale that we produced with guidance from our Independent Science Advisory Board, which just happens to have a psychometrics professor on it. Learners were sent this survey, so all learners, whether they were identified with a need or not, were sent a survey and were asked several questions. The survey identified that learners who were identified with learning needs on our assessment reported that they were also less confident about performing everyday tasks, such as reading and understanding written information. Many of us take these types of tasks for granted, but for some people, it can have a serious impact on their learning journey and their chances of completion. After 3 months of engaging with a personalised support programme, and of course additional support from their learning provider, learners were sent the same survey. Apprentices that received support over the 3-month period reported an increase of confidence by 14% on average, and their motivation increased by 16% on average. Crucially, learners who did not have identified learning needs and therefore did not receive support experienced no increase in confidence or motivation over the same period of time. This finding is important because measures of confidence have been proved to have the highest correlation with academic achievement. We also compared our cognitive assessment dataset to the government deprivation indices. And what that told us was learners who match with a need on our assessment and therefore qualify for support are more likely to come from postcodes with higher education, skills and training deprivation. This is likely to have a compounding effect on a learner's chance of success, especially when combined with cognitive differences. Essentially, learners who are likely to struggle as a result of their neurodiversity are also likely to have had or have additional barriers they have to overcome by way of living in a highly deprived area, which of course will have an impact on dropout rates. It's therefore even more important to identify and support these learners as early on programme as possible. I just want to go back to that point I made about the link between low cognition scores and low confidence. Individuals who are neurodiverse also have low confidence towards learning. Now, you could say that could be expected. However, this is proven, this is the learner's voice, and we need to be listening to this. Unsupported neurodiverse learners will be experiencing an additional barrier in the perception of their own abilities to learn and to ultimately succeed. Many learners desperately need support in education, but aren't getting the right support at the right time, meaning educators are having a really hard time with increased dropout and lower attainment. So we need to take a holistic approach to improving confidence and other positive outcomes for learners who are likely to face greater barriers in education. Touching on the dropout point, the sector is painfully aware that non-completion rates are really high. They're staggeringly high, around the 54% mark year on year. So our second study wanted to look at whether there is a correlation between non-completion and cognition. As you're probably aware, there's been a plethora of research that's gone into looking at reasons behind dropout, but not cognition to this point. So what we did was we shared a data set with Realise, one of our partner clients, and we overlaid that data set with cognition scores. We then ran a regression analysis on this data set to investigate whether we could predict which learners were at risk of dropping out and if their cognition was actually a factor. What we found was that learning difficulties were in fact significant risk factors for learners dropping out. Now, with this knowledge, we can help providers to proactively identify learners who are at greater risk of dropout to start to work to prevent this outcome, allowing providers to implement early and comprehensive support interventions and ensure the way they are delivering their curriculum is tailored to accommodate all types of thinker and is unbiased to a type of learning. This research is the start of some very exciting data collection and continues with other partner clients. It could prove to be groundbreaking for the sector. In the coming months, this is going to be continued with thousands of learners. Now, the final part of my bit of the session, I wanted to use to explain some of the work that we've carried out with partners in the sector, including MESMA, and providers via working groups. We developed a quality assurance framework for learners with learning difficulties and/or disabilities. The point behind this was we wanted to provide the sector with a self-reflective tool that they could use to quality assure and assess their LLDD practices and ultimately improve on them. We've listened to many providers across the sector and we know there is a lack of confidence in this area. There's a lack of information and there's a lack of resources that relate to identification and support of learners with LLDD. So this is a really simple 5-stage framework that allows you to look at your support processes and identify gaps and areas for improvement. So the first stage is identify. This is absolutely the crucial stage because it informs all the other stages. So at the beginning of a programme, you need to decide how you are assessing learners' starting points. This is really complex and not one assessment can do it. You have to use several different types of assessment. This is not only to understand prior learning, but also to assess the existence of learning difficulties and/or disabilities. This is so you comply with the Equality Act, the Education Act, and the Public Sector Equality Duty. So it's possible to make reasonable adjustments for any learner that requires them throughout their learning journey to ensure that they reach their full potential. So you want to use a variety of different assessments. For example, initial assessment, diagnostic assessment, cognitive assessment, mental health screeners, functional skills tests, etc. This is all about finding the accurate starting point because it's not easy to identify hidden needs and quite often learners choose to hide them or not disclose them for a variety of reasons. It's essential that reasonable adjustments for formative and summative assessments are considered, including endpoint assessment, for which there is guidance on the IFATE website. All of the initial assessment data should inform a learning needs assessment, and this needs to be linked to the knowledge, skills and behaviours of the programme to enable a clear judgment to be made as to whether or not the learner has a difficulty that will prevent them from completing their programmes without support. The second stage is plan. Once an LDD has been identified, it's essential to develop a learning support plan. And this needs to be done with the learner in order to provide the necessary reasonable adjustments and support to mitigate the impact of their learning difficulty and/or disability on their education. The learning support plan is now a requirement in the ESFA funding rules for learning support funding claims. From a quality perspective, it is critical that the information collected through the initial assessment processes accurately identifies the learner's starting point. And then this is used to inform the learner's individual planning, recorded in the ILP, the commitment statement, and adapted schemes of work. Support. You deliver the support. And, of course, reasonable adjustments. Reasonable adjustments are not just for assessment time. They need to be threaded through the learning support journey and then be reflected at endpoint assessment. Delivering this support should help the learner overcome and mitigate the identified barriers to learning as much as is reasonably possible to ensure the learner has the best possible opportunity to succeed. So a range of strategies and reasonable adjustments need to be delivered to meet those individual needs. And quite often, this plan will have to change because, you know, a plan is only a plan, of course. So things might change as the programme becomes more and more complex. It might be necessary to modify the plan or scrap it and completely rework it if it's not working, if it's not being effective in meeting the learner's needs. And this also goes to say, if a learner has an identified need and rejects support, it's still important to revisit those conversations throughout the learning journey with the learner, because at some point they may decide that support would be beneficial to them. So this is why the review is so important. Progress reviews are a critical part of all learners' journeys on any programme of study. The learning support journey for learners with an LDD is no different, and it's actually more important from a quality and compliance perspective. Learning support reviews should evaluate the progress made by the learner and the effectiveness of the learning support plan and resources in developing the reasonable adjustments to overcome the identified barriers to learning. The learner needs to be at the centre of the review, and the employer should be also involved if possible and agreed by the learner. The best progress reviews seen are learner-centric using coaching methodology, and this increases learner buy-in, increases engagement, and creates a partnership of support. The final stage, preparation and progression. Preparation clearly starts back at the first stages of the journey with identify and plan. The whole framework ensures that the learner is being prepared effectively for their next steps after Gateway, but also after the programme finishes. This could be progression to the next level programme, a promotion, or new responsibilities. The quality assurance framework has now been digitised by Mesmer and can be accessed for free, and it will remain to be free for anyone. You don't have to be a Mesmer customer to access this particular module. We wanted to provide quality assurance practices for learning support to really bring this topic to the forefront of providers' minds, really. It's important that we share best practice, we share exemplars, and we identify where we're not quite providing the right support to learners at the right time. I realise I've given you a lot of information here, but the slides will be available afterwards, and you will be able to download our handbook and our neurodiversity masterclass by accessing the QR codes here. I will be revisiting these slides when Connor's finished his bit, so don't worry if you've not had a chance to take a picture of the QR codes yet. So, Connor, over to you, please. I think you're on mute.
Hello. So yeah, I was on mute. So a bit about myself. Obviously, my name's Connor. I'm an activity apprentice, activity instructor at Kingswood, and I'm part of the Skern Training Skills program, which is very different from a lot of learning. I've just turned 27. I've done a lot of learning in my life, and this is a complete sort of breath of fresh air, I guess, to what I've experienced in the past. So I can do that. There we go. So I guess, yeah, where it all started. So school for me wasn't the best experience in the world. My needs weren't catered to. There was a lot of things that I was trying to escape, and one of my biggest things was BMX racing. And I started I say an early age. I started about 13, 14, and I'd ride every day, blah blah blah, and I'd spend every hour I could. And my escape from school and learning was ride my bike. But effectively, I was learning because I found a passion for myself, and I was learning something different, but something I wanted to do. And I think that's the most important thing, that it was my choice and the choice I made, I guess. So then I left school, and one of the goals I set myself was to learn as many different skills and trades, while gaining as much knowledge as I could to benefit me throughout my life. And as I go on, I can use them as it comes forward. So, I've been to college, I've done bricklaying, I've done plumbing, and all these skills that I've used, these trades and these skills, I can come back to them, I can do them, but still progressing and still developing myself. And I think that's the most important thing for me, was finding something I enjoy, because I felt in love with a lot of things, especially out of riding and plumbing, and I just didn't want to do that. So I kind of left that all behind, and decided to choose something else, which is where Kingswood comes along. And so in 2019, I did a season at the Isle of Wight, and I started working for Kingswood, and I loved it. So I wanted to do the apprenticeship. But this is 2019. This was before the program I do now, and I'd done 7 months of the program from August 2019 to COVID March 2020, and furloughed for about 4 months, and then got laid off. But I was really passionate, wanted to get back into it, and I'd heard some very exciting things about the SCERN program, or what they were going to do and how they're going to change it. So again, like, I'd done one before, I'd done two before. And for me, it's the on-the-job experience. What I like, get my hands dirty, actually feeling for the job, the experience. The knowledge I have now that I know about all the things I know about, is just through the experiences I've experienced. And that's how we, I guess, learn, through experience. And then we can pass that knowledge on, I guess. And I guess, and it kind of leads me on to my failures. And failing for me is the biggest thing. But I am my biggest critic when it comes to that. But it taught me a very valuable thing. So failing for me isn't a negative thing, and this is the thing where I want to change minds. So we have a lot of apprentices where I work at the moment, and for me, it's changing their minds of how they want to learn. And through the use of Cognassist, we can do that, because having a personal development plan and having all these tools and strategies, we're able to be successful. But we first have to learn to fail, because if we don't learn to fail, we won't ever continue to learn. And so it taught me a valuable lesson of getting over those things and continuing my development. It offers success, it opens the door for more learning, more development, allows for the wins become more frequent. When you win, you feel better about yourself, but you have to let yourself fail. um, and then eventually, you start those wins start to become more frequent. They're little wins. The big ones don't teach you anything. They're kind of they're and I can't even say the word, an anomaly in the system. They're fake. They don't mean anything. It's the small wins, because the small wins mean proof of consistency through your learning. And that's the biggest thing. And so for me, Cognassist, and why I'm so passionate about Cognassist and why I use Cognassist, because I have a personal development plan that shows me what I need to do and what I have to do, and it gives me skills, gives me strategies and tools to use in the real world. We have all this raw data when you do an assessment, and that's what it was like before. You get all this raw data. Cool, you're dyslexic, but what are you doing after that? And what Cognisis does, which is really brilliant, is that they have all this raw data, but it kind of gets put to the side, and they go, right, this is what we're going to do with you, because this is the data and this are the tools that represent the data, and we're going to give you these tools, and you're going to go practice them, and you're going to do it every month and practice and practice and practice, and eventually you 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 become a different person. um and that for me is the biggest thing, and that's why I guess I chose the apprenticeship because I was able to fail, but also I had the support there to be able to do it, and to be able to fail. And it's proof as well, because last week I was on a course, and I'm happy to say this because I'm a very accountable person to myself, and I got deferred on my course, because I wasn't ready, and that's because I understand in my mind that I take a little bit longer to learn, and the course is set out for learners without learning difficulties and who aren't neurodiverse. So for me, I knew I would struggle, and it's proof because I did, and I got deferred. But the benefit to that is I know why I struggled, so next time I won't. So yeah, we work with children, all ages from 8 to 18, with all learning difficulties, behavioural backgrounds, walks of life. They could come from London, they could come from the poshest areas in the world, but it doesn't matter. They're all the same to us. We offer the same thing, and that is a life-changing experience. And so they can learn and take away something. And that for me is what I wanted as a child. I wanted a life-changing experience, but I never really got that. But I get that through my apprenticeship and what I do now. And it changes me in a way, not because I gain something massive out of it, but I gain all these skills and tools and necessary things that are going to make me successful in the future. So yeah, eventually after all the failures and little wins, you look back and I don't in the slides I put some pictures, and so if on the first slide there's me. That was one of my first ever races, and it was this really big crash, and there was an air ambulance. Luckily I was fine, but if we look now and like I look back and I look to the future and I look now where I am, I go, how far I've come. And this is the biggest thing, is that we can take the learner and look at their situation and go, oh, that's okay, because in 6 months' time you're going to be here, and in 6 months' time we're going to review that, and we can look back on that situation and look at where you come from, and the bigger picture starts to arise and form, and you start to progress. And that's how we change the mind of the learner, and that's, I think, that's the key, is changing the mind of the learner. I've got a couple more slides that I put together, so I'm going to go through them now. So it was a bit of food for thought, and again, I wanted to kind of get your minds thinking in all this. So we take a learner who doesn't want to be in education because of all the barriers there, or whether it's an apprenticeship, college, university, whether these things, it doesn't matter what sort of situation they're in. We have to change their mind, and how we can do that is being positive with them and showing them where we can take them and what they're going to achieve out of it, and giving them purpose to their education. Because a lot of when I was growing up was, you've got to do this because you're dyslexic, you've got to do this because it's required of you. There's no why to it. And a lot of today's culture and society, we want to know why we're doing things. Why do you do anything? As people, we want to know why, and I'm going to keep saying why, because that's the most important thing. If a learner knows why they're doing it, they find purpose. Once they find purpose, they become successful, and that's the key to everything. In any situation, they know why, they can experience the things, and then once they experience it, they gain the knowledge, and then it's that cycle over and over again until eventually you finish your you're at the end of your apprenticeship, you're almost at EPA, where I am right now. So this is me, this is my next steps. So, through all the hardship, the lows and the highs and the lows, I'm here, I'm completed, I'm 100% on all my work. And it's only because I understand why I needed some certain things. I only understand why I needed Cognassist. Because if I didn't understand why, there was no point to it. I know a few learners who opted out of it because I personally feel that they didn't understand why it was good for them or what they needed to get out of it. And that's what we need to do for these learners, is go, why do you want to be here? What do you want to gain out of this? This can help you in that way. I think that's the biggest thing for me. But yeah, my next steps, EPA are in May, on the 9th and 12th. And then fingers crossed, I've got it all in the bag. And then I move into my new role end of May, beginning of June. So that is me.
What's your new role, Connor?
So I should be going into an event leader role. So it's essentially what I do now, but with a little bit more responsibility. Just more observing the new apprentices and new staff. Just taking a bigger sort of step in the operations of the of 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 activities within. So like again, like I said, observing, running training, coaching, developing my coaching and stuff like that. So again, after that, my training doesn't stop. So I'll have my new personal development plan for my new role, in which I will have things set out for me, which will give me a new place to aim for.
That's amazing to hear, and I can see lots of people sending you bravo, clapping hands, to hear your inspiring story, and it needs to be said, doesn't it? Like it is all about learner buy-in, it's their education, it's your education, so you need to understand why you're doing these things. Do you think your experiences in education have made you a better instructor to help your learners now?
I think the thing for me is that when I have a group of 15, 16 participants, I can look across the room as such, and I can kind of identify where they are and what they want to get out of it. Some of them just want to do the activity and they're done. It's not their thing. Some are interested in learning, and that's where in the classroom and out the classroom, because again, I wasn't in the classroom learner, and that's what I got stuck with. That was my card dealt to me. But because I've had the choice to come here, I can see that and I can go that's that child, that's this child, and not to go put a label on them, but then I can adapt my sessions to their needs and make it unique, and so they get the experience as same as the other children, but for them. And I think that's the key thing.
Agreed. When you hear people say, oh, you know, I can't do maths, there's no such thing. It's just they've been presented with maths in the wrong way for their brains.
Maths is like so this is the conversation that popped up last year, and it always comes up as within apprenticeships about why do we need maths and English. And my thing for maths is like another language, and the reason why certain people will struggle with maths is because it's a different language to English, and that's why I struggle with Spanish, but I don't struggle with maths because they're two different languages and you have to understand them in different ways. And that's the other thing, is breaking that down and going, what do you prefer? What do you want to learn?
Fantastic. So we're going to leave it there. So if you do have any questions, please, for Connor or myself, please drop them in the chat. We'll do our best to answer them. But I just want to repeat that nugget that Connor shared as a lasting thought, really. Be positive with your learner support and answer the why question. Don't just tell them to do something, explain why that thing will be beneficial for their success. And we'll finish on this slide that I've already shown you, but it's going to give you more time to grab the QR codes if you want them. The How to Support Neurodiverse Learners Handbook is essentially a practical application of all of this information, and it's easy to understand and quick to implement. And I highly recommend the Neurodiversity Masterclass. This is the education one that I'm showing you here. We released our Neurodiversity at Work Masterclass yesterday. So that's on LinkedIn or on our website. The education one is all about cognition, supporting neurodiversity in practice, reasonable adjustments. There's an Ofsted module, which is delivered by our former Deputy Director for Further Education and Skills, Marina Gaze, and an ESFA compliance module with Carl Bentley, who is Senior Manager at RSM. Thank you very much for your attendance, and thank you very much for your time.